Hey, what's up guys, Marc here and welcome back to another video tutorial. So today we're going to learn how to color your drawings. This is something that's been coming up a lot. A lot of people have been asking for this for many years, even though I have, similar-ish kind of videos in my library. Over the years, still my techniques, this workflow that I'm about to show you has been a little bit more streamlined and maybe simplified. Anyways, I think it's pretty solid now. And I'm going to show you exactly what I do to color my drawings in two different ways. The first technique I call the gradient map technique, and then the other one is going to be the classic technique. The main difference between the two is going to be the middle step here, one where we use gradient maps in Photoshop, and the other one which can we just use flat colors. And so the classic one is better, I guess, for the majority of people because it will be possible to do this in any software that you have. Whereas the gradient map technique here is going to be only possible in Photoshop or other software that also have gradient maps, although I'm not familiar with any, but yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Anyways, both techniques boil down to 5 different steps, so pretty straightforward, and you can see here they're all the same in the same order. So first we're going to start with the flat gray. So that would be this one here. From there, we'll move on to the shading and the ambient occlusion. So we'll take a look at exactly what that is once we get to it. Then the gradient maps or the flat colors, then the lights, and then the final polish. All right, enough talking, let's start painting. So the second step here is going to be the shadows, which is what I'll be tackling now. And basically there's kind of 2 ways to go about it. So you can go very subtle, which would be more like the ambient occlusion way. And ambient occlusion, for those of you that don't know, well, probably Google it. But basically it's just self shadow. So kind of shadows that don't really involve any light. It's really just the kind of absence of light that you'll find in the cracks and holes and crevices and things like that. But what I like to do is something that's a little bit more pushed than that, so a little bit more rendered, where you'll see you'll be able to better read the volumes. And so there's a spectrum there, and it's really up to you whether you go really heavy on the shading or you go a little bit more subtle. In my case, it's kind of right in the middle. And then just like that, we're ready to move on to step 3, selecting that flat layer, and then basically just breaking it up into different sections, which are going to be the main colors of our character. Super simple, just using the good old lasso tool and picking a bunch of random colors that look kind of okay together. All right, so I'm pretty much done with the flat colors now for this one. So step number 3, check. And I have to do the same thing on the other side. But before I move on to the gradient maps, I'm actually going to be copying over my my flat colors here so that I can use those different flats as selections. So almost like selection bookmarks, so I don't have to redo my selections. But before I move on to gradient maps, let's make this these 2 drawings look a little bit better. So we're going to tint the ambient occlusion or the shading layer. So basically it's just, control balance, and having a little bit of a tint there in your shadows always looks just richer in general. It's a better look to it. At least I prefer it. So we're going to copy that over to the other one, why not? Now there's one more step that I really like to add, and it makes the drawing just read a lot better. And that is going to be a kind of a top-down gradient. So basically at the bottom of the character is just going to be a little bit darker. Once again, we can use the flat layer. We can just duplicate it or just isolate the selection and apply that gradient just onto the silhouette of the character, nothing else. And this helps emphasize the face of the character or the top of the body, the area of the character that's a little bit more interesting. And similarly here, we're going to copy that over to the other side. And now, well, we're left with 2 drawings that are exactly the same, which is perfect to show you the difference between the flat colors and the gradient maps. So the first thing we're going to do here is go in the flat layer, and with the magic wand, select what we want to color. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything that's red, and then I'm going to go over everything and create a gradient map. So this is important. You have to do this on top of everything else so that the gradient map can influence everything that's underneath. Now it's going to give you a kind of this random color, and then if you open the gradient map editor, you're going to see a bunch of crappy gradients here, the Photoshop default. Those are not that. Those are all custom ones that I've kind of worked on over the years. But basically, I have one here already set for the red so that you can see the difference right away. And then yeah, that is going to be the main difference here. So before, after, this is not a whole lot of difference, right? So between the flat colors and the gradient maps, it's very subtle, but objectively, gradient maps is just better because you have more control over the range of colors, all the different colors associated with the different values. You can control all of that. Whereas in the flat colors here, you can't. I mean, it doesn't look bad, you know, some people might even prefer this look, but it's always just a nicer, richer look that you get with the gradient maps. And this is why I prefer it. In addition to all of that, is that you can always go back to it and change it if you don't like it, right? So if you're in a team, in a production team, and you go talk to your art director and you're like, hey, so this is my final design, what do you think? And he's like, well, yeah, that fabric is not bad, but maybe, you know, can you make the highlights on this red maybe a little bit bluer, and can you make the shadows maybe a little bit lighter, like a I don't know, like a reddish tint to it? Well, if you were this guy here, you'd be like, ah, crap, you bastard. Now I have to do a lot of different things to be able to get those changes in. Whereas if you're this guy and you're working with gradient maps, you're like, yes, boss, no problem. Here we go. Reddish tint for the darks, and you wanted a little bit more blue for the highlights. How about that? Yes. All right. Ship it. So basically that's going to be you know, the other main reason why gradient maps are great, because they are super flexible. Yeah, that's it. Now let's work on the rest of those gradients. Now there's one thing that's probably good to keep in mind when working with gradient maps, and it would be to not have too many. You don't want to end up, you know, 25. Instead, just focus on the big areas and leave the smaller details for the final polish pass. All right, so now the gradient map's pretty much done. As you can see, very quick, especially once we have the different regions here already in our flat, already selected in our flats. And I think it's a little bit more obvious when the whole character is done now, the difference between the two. So you can see the classic technique here. We can still see the line art, you know, pretty clearly with this black outline, which is, you know, it's a cool look. It's different. And then on the gradient side here, it definitely feels a little bit more painterly already, because the line art's starting to disappear already. For example, here on the skin, you know, you can see the line art itself getting tinted by the gradient map. And so it's that painterly look in particular, and like the richness of the colors here and the flexibility that I really like. But yeah, now we're ready to move on to the lights step. So the fourth step. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and once again, isolate our flat colors. So make sure that we select only the silhouette of the character here. And on top of our layer stack, we're going to create a new adjustment layer here, and we can go, basically what we're trying to do is darken this so that we can light it up. And we're going to select the levels. So here we have our levels, and then we can start to darken things. So basically we'll want to pull that down here, reduce the light from this side here. Just like that should be good enough. And technically, you know, you could add different adjustment layers if you want to tint your shadows maybe a little bit more. So we could do the same thing here and go color balance, for example, tint that a little bit more blue, because we're about to add some warmer highlights on here. And it's always great to have a nice balance between the warm highlights and the cooler shadows. Instead of doing this twice, I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate these, move them over to the other character. And then once again, on top of everything, we're going to go ahead and create a new layer. And this one's going to be set to overlay. Then we're going to select a nice warm light for, I don't know, for the sun. Let's just go ahead with the assumption that she's outside. And then we are going to isolate the same character once again so that we don't draw, you know, outside of the silhouette. And now we can paint in the lights. Ooh, look at that. Of course, it helps to create or to come up with a light setup before we move on to this this particular step. But in my case, we're going to go pretty simple. It'll be something like this, you know, a light coming from the top, maybe a little bit from the front, and that's pretty much it. So we're going to start with one light source for now. You can add as many as you want, right? So you could have like bounce light coming from below, maybe like some sort of rim light coming from behind. Maybe we'll add that, maybe not. We'll see. Keep watching to find out. But now with our light setup in mind, let's go ahead and paint the highlight on here. So super simple. All you have to do is imagine that you are the light and that you're looking down on this character. What do you see? Everything that you see, that's going to be lit, and everything else will be in the shadows. Piece of cake. But no, seriously, probably use references for this. If you have a little mannequin that you can pose, just shine a light on it to get at least a decent idea of what, of where the highlights should be. Because if you mess up this step, if I mess up this step, then the end result's gonna look like hot garbage. But I'm pretty much done now with the first pass. And again, you know, it doesn't have to be super well done. It's just the first pass. Copy that over. All right, now this one here never looks that great, you know, after this one step. So you need to really adjust the levels of your shadows so that it's not too overpowering. You can reduce those a little bit, and at the same time, it's going to reduce, it's going to reveal our line art a little bit more, which is, you know, kind of the style that we're going for here, anyways. So there's two ways that you can do that. You can either reduce the opacity here of the layer, or you can go ahead and control with or play around with the levels by reducing or compacting the shadows a bit more. Before, after, a lot lighter. Yeah, I think it reads a lot better this way. And of course, if you want, you can always double or like duplicate this layer here if it's not intense enough, as many times as you want. I think it worked. It worked kind of okay here. Maybe reduce the intensity of the gradient a bit more. There we go. So of course, it's still very rough, but yeah, it's starting to look a little bit more 3D. It definitely looks better. So let's go ahead and add another light. So we're going to go and add a blue light for the sky. So a light that's coming kind of like this. So slightly from behind in bluish tint. So of course, we want to have this on a separate layer so that we can play with, so that each individual light is on its own layer. I'm going to select once again our silhouette and start painting blue, making sure we set that layer as well on to overlay. I think that blue is going to work really well with the red to kind of balance it out, make the whole character maybe a little bit less warm. So better balance between the cool colors and the warm colors. There we go. All right, now we have another light. As you can see here, it's super rough still. Remember that we still have the final pass on everything. So this is really where we'll get all those finer details, you know, like working on the face here for all the subtleties that we don't have yet. But let's go ahead and duplicate that and apply it to the other side as well. So like I said, you know, duplicating the light might look kind of cool depending which one. So this looks pretty interesting. So yeah, let's proceed to the final step and add that final polish. So yeah, at this point, you know, this is when you'll want to make any modification to the colors and things like that, because after we're done with the polish, it's game over, we're done. And so there's, you know, going back will be a little bit harder. So in this step, you know, I kind of go over everything. The whole process so far has been really, really rough. And that's the point. It's by design so that you don't waste any time, you know, at any point until the very last moment when you're really sure that you kind of dig this and that you're going to commit. But yeah, so I'm just going to make a couple final adjustments here and try to get this thing at least to an acceptable level. Now, of course, I'm not going to, you know, spend hours and hours on this. So it's still going to look super generic, and there's really nothing to this design. But I think it serves a purpose, you know, for this tutorial. And that is kind of the whole process. So, but hopefully this gives you a better idea on the various steps that you'll have to do to color pretty much any drawing. But yeah, anyways, I hope you like the final result. It looks alright, and hopefully, you know, you'll try this technique as well. Let me know. If you do, tag me on Instagram and show me what you do. I would love to see it. Alright, that's it. Bye.